blockchain.com. Today we're at the Blockchain Revolution conference, and we're talking about how to create a blueprint for the mass adoption of blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies. Today we have pioneer in this field, Luke Stokes. He'll tell us a little bit about his background, and then he can tell us a little bit about why blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies are important. Luke, take it away.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate the introduction. Thank you for having me. I've been in this space for almost 8 years. I have a technology background, majored in computer science, built a company called FoxyCart, which is an e-commerce shopping cart company. So I was very familiar with the payment space for about 10 years working on that company. And around 2018, I decided to sell my company to focus full-time on the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, to do consulting and advising. I've been involved since, I guess, early January 2013, actually. And so I've been very, very passionate about this. I remember giving a presentation early on about how Bitcoin was going to be more disruptive than the internet. And the presentation I'll give today is a little bit similar to that, a version of that presentation. And my hope is that you'll come away from this talk with an understanding of what Bitcoin is, what a blockchain is, what cryptocurrency is, and why any of it matters. So if you want, I could jump right in, or we could do a little Q&A, or we could just have the Q&A at the end. Either way is fine with me. Oh, and I guess I should say I'm currently the managing director for something called the Foundation for Inter-Wallet Operability, the FIO protocol. Our aim is to make cryptocurrency easier, because as I'll present today, you'll see some of this stuff is a little confusing. And so we're trying to make it so that everyone can use cryptocurrency, no matter your level of education, technology-wise. And so that's been my focus for almost 2 years now.
Thank you. We'll go into the Q&A after this presentation. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. I'll go ahead and present my screen here, and go ahead and stop me if you can't see this for some reason, but hopefully it's coming through okay. So we'll start with, what is Bitcoin and why does it matter? Again, my name is Luke Stokes. You can reach me at Luke Stokes on Twitter or Telegram, or my email address is luke.stokes@gmail.com. So we'll start with why. Why does this matter? And we'll go through a brief history of money. What is Bitcoin? Why Bitcoin matters? What is a blockchain? What is a cryptocurrency? And then also we'll touch on a little bit of how you can actually buy or own or store Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and then end with some question and answers, which I hope will be some fun. So brief history of money. The money as it exists today that we know of really started in the late 17th century with the Bank of London. And that was just kind of the first creation of these central bank concepts. And in the United States, we had multiple attempts at a central bank, then they actually got shut down. So the first Bank of the United States, the second Bank of the United States, these were things that at their time were recognized as maybe not a good thing. And so the people pushed back and said, we'd rather not have a central bank controlling our currency. And then in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act kind of put in place more concretely what we have today and the central banking system, which is a central control of basically money itself and value itself. Not too many people know this, but part of our history, and when I say our, I'm talking from a United States citizen perspective, is the Executive Order 1602. In 1933, FDR made it illegal to actually own gold. So you couldn't actually own and control your own store of value. And the convertibility between gold and the US dollar was taken away. And why that's important is following that in 1944 in the Bretton Woods Agreement, this is after the war, most of the world was devastated. And so what the agreement was is essentially send all your gold to the United States. We'll put it in Fort Knox. We'll peg our dollar, the US dollar, to gold, and you peg your dollar to our dollar. And thus the United States and the US dollar became the world reserve currency. And then in 1971, the Nixon shock, as it's called, during the Vietnam War, President Nixon said, you know what, we're no longer going to honor this tie between gold and the US dollar. And they actually removed the convertibility of the US dollar to gold. And that's when it became full fiat money. So you might ask, well, what is fiat? Well, fiat money is basically just money declared by a government to be legal tender. It's state issued money, which is neither convertible by law or any other thing. And it doesn't have anything, there's no fixed objective standard. There's nothing backing it. It's really just because we said so. It's money with no intrinsic value at all. And so you might ask, well, is this a bad thing? Is this a good thing? Well, there's been historically over 700 different fiat currencies, almost 800, and most of them eventually fail. In fact, they fail in about an average of 27 years. So if you think back to 1971 and the Nixon shock, where the US dollar went to fiat currency, we're kind of on borrowed time if you think about the average for the US dollar. And I know there's a statistics a lot of people have been talking about lately that over 20% of all the US dollars that even exist have been created this very year in 2020. So this currency is being quickly inflated. And why that matters to you and the rest of the world is that the United States dollar is the world reserve currency. And what that means is essentially all goods and services, all other currencies are essentially pegged and evaluated based on how they perform against this world reserve currency. But as you can see from the chart here, we haven't always been the world reserve currency. It was Portugal, Spain, Netherlands, France, Britain, and then of course from 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement, the United States took over. And as you can see here, when you look at the average lifespan of a world reserve currency, that is also on borrowed time. So if you've heard people talking about what's going on in China and the bloc nations, a lot of people are thinking about creating a new currency of sorts that might be a basket of currencies, and it might actually include cryptocurrency as well. So what is Bitcoin? How does this play in? Bitcoin is essentially the first decentralized payment network and secure digital currency. And by decentralized, I just mean it has no single point of failure. There's not one group or small group of people that can control it and turn it off or censor it. And by digital currency, it's not all that much different than most of the currencies in the world today. You know, physical dollar bills are not the majority of the money supply. You know, most of it's ones and zeros passed back and forth between computers. The major difference is that this is as a cryptocurrency, it's actually decentralized and not controlled in a traditional way. And we'll explain what that means in a bit. And so when you think about a cryptocurrency, it's often defined by a blockchain. And a blockchain is a globally distributed payment network. So if you've ever used like Google Sheets or Excel, anything that's a spreadsheet, it's those things where you see a whole bunch of rows and you can, accountants use and you can put information in there. It's also called a ledger. And basically what the blockchain is a globally distributed, trusted spreadsheet, very much like you'd imagine a Google spreadsheet. And so anytime anyone goes in and makes a change or adds a record to that spreadsheet, everyone else everywhere in the world immediately gets to see that update. And it's done so that you can never undo an entry on the spreadsheet. So if someone was to send me, one token of value and that gets entered into this global trusted spreadsheet, it's impossible for anyone else to deny that transaction happened, to block that transaction, or in any way change that transaction. And that's really important because money has always been a ledger, and this is essentially the best ledger ever invented. So what is a cryptocurrency? It's a decentralized digital token of value that you completely control, meaning you have full self-sovereign control of a true cryptocurrency. And the issuing of the currency isn't controlled by a third party or by some violent government or by some warlord or central bank or anything like that. It's actually controlled by math and physics. And it's distributed in the blockchain's paradigm to those who secure the network. So that payment network, the blockchain, that spreadsheet or ledger, there's only certain entries that are valid to be added to that ledger. For example, if someone sends me 10 Bitcoin and then I want to send someone else 11 Bitcoin, clearly that would be an invalid transaction because I only have 10. And so what these validators are also called miners or block producers, what they do is they secure the network and they validate every transaction that goes onto the network. And they do a certain process where it's random, it's called proof of work, but there's a certain process where on average, about every 10 minutes, they solve a very difficult problem and they're able to, and it's a mathematical problem. When they solve that problem, they're able to get a reward of new issuance of currency. So that's how the currency is controlled. It's very transparent, very clear to everyone involved around the world. Everyone plays by the same rules, and there's never going to be more than 21 million Bitcoin. So there's not going to be a situation where you can just hyperinflate it. And in fact, every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that is distributed to these miners who are securing the network actually goes down. And so it's a very clear understanding of how the system works and how the math works and how everyone's involved and how they're rewarded for securing the network. So why is all this important? Before I go too much into that, I want to give a few quotes to set a historical context for how money is so pivotal and important to our lives in many ways, and people don't realize this or think about it often. So for example, whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. James A. Garfield. It is well that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. For if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Henry Ford. History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. James Madison. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. The issuing power of money should be taken away from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Thomas Jefferson. Why Bitcoin matters is because if someone can control the money supply, and by that through credit systems, interest rates, and risk, they literally control the people that rely on that money supply. By controlling the money, you literally can create slaves out of the people in a geographic region dominated by that money. And it's really, really important to understand this. We spend 8 hours a day or sometimes more away from our family, away from our kids and our wives and our husbands to go work and earn money. And yet a lot of people never think about what money actually is. In the 2008 financial crisis, they had these bonds that were basically junk, but they were rated AAA. And of course, that led to all types of malinvestment and very, very detrimental economic realities for many people throughout the world. And the issues that were discovered in 2008 have not been resolved. In many ways, they're only worse. There's far more speculation going on today. The regulations are not adequate to prevent it. And it does come down to the ability to print money out of nothing. So Bitcoin removes this third-party risk, whether it be a central bank or a government, and allows individuals to have self-sovereignty and financial freedom. When I talk about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, to me, I'm talking about freedom. I'm talking about the individual being able to control their own stored value, no matter where they live, no matter their race, creed, religion, no matter anything about their personal characteristics. They have the ability to own their own store of value, and that gives them an economic voice in the world. And again, it's controlled by math and physics. There's no central control. Therefore, it's very, very difficult to corrupt. There's no one that can come in and say, well, I'd like to change the rules a little bit to make sure I get more money than you. It's very meritocratic, and everyone who participates plays by the same rules. So when you think about, is this for real? Are people like trusting in this? It's been around for about 12 years now. And if you look at bitcointreasuries.org as an example, and these are just some of the companies, these are publicly traded companies. Then in the case of MicroStrategy, for example, they put over $400 million of their company treasury into Bitcoin. So you might ask, like, why would they do that? If this is such a volatile, risky investment, why would they do that? And there's actually a great interview with the person involved with MicroStrategy that came up with this, basically this strategy for his company and the longevity of the value of his company's treasury. Highly recommend taking a look at his words and his thoughts on this. But it's essentially any other form of store of value, whether it's in currency, where you have inflation possibilities, or whether it's in gold, which they're always pulling more gold out of the ground, for example, and talking about mining asteroids, or whether it's even real estate. There's always this third-party risk where you're not actually going to be able to control your store of value, and you have others that you have to rely on to not deflate or decrease the value that you have. So what does it mean to actually own Bitcoin? When you own Bitcoin, you essentially control a line on that spreadsheet. So again, if you're thinking about that spreadsheet analogy or that shared ledger, that database, you have a Bitcoin address. So if you look down here, that 1AGK, really kind of long, confusing string, that is what's called your public key or your Bitcoin address. It can also be represented here as a QR code. And with that address, it's also paired to basically a password or a private key. And those public and private keys go together in such a way that if someone wants to send you Bitcoin, they essentially transfer using their private key a certain amount of value to your public key. And once that transfer is completed and it's validated by those who secure the network, then you have a guaranteed immutable, meaning it can't be modified or changed and it can't be undone, store of value that you now control. And the only way that those tokens can be removed from that entry that you control on the public ledger is by signing a message with your private key that only you have access to. And towards the end, we can talk a little bit about the work we're doing with Field Protocol to make this even easier. So instead of these really confusing addresses, you can have a human readable address like Luke at Stokes, and you can support many different cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin. There is actually 5, 6, 7,000 different cryptocurrencies today. There are many, many different cryptocurrencies other than just Bitcoin. But the main ones that most people talk about are Bitcoin, Ethereum, USDT, which is a pegged cryptocurrency to the US dollar, as well as many others. And you can go to CoinGecko.com or CoinMarketCap.com to see all the different cryptocurrencies and what their market caps are. Many of them are worth more than small countries, which is kind of amazing. The total market cap of the cryptocurrency ecosystem is still small, but is growing rapidly. And it's, very, very interesting to keep track of. So how can you actually buy cryptocurrency? The first step would be to get yourself what's called a wallet. And there are two major types of a wallet. You have a software wallet or a hardware wallet. So a software wallet would be something that you install on your computer or on your phone. And it's essentially a secure vault for storing your private key. And so that if anyone sends cryptocurrency to your public key that private key is associated with, only you will have access to be able to move that around. And if you're just doing like a small amount and you want to want to learn how to use cryptocurrency, you want to buy a little bit, that would be the recommended way to go, is get yourself a software wallet, either on your phone or on your computer, and buy some crypto and just kind of get familiar with it. Now, if you're looking to do a long-term investment, and I want to be clear, this isn't financial advice, I'm just giving this for educational purposes, but you can get yourself a hardware wallet, such as a Trezor or a Ledger Nano. Now, a hardware wallet is a small physical device that you plug into your computer, and it does one thing and one thing only, which is sign cryptographic messages, sign those transactions on the blockchain. So it can't be easily hacked, it can't be distorted. Even if you plug it into a computer that has a virus, for example, you have a high level of confidence that your transaction will go through appropriately, because it'll show you right on the device exactly what address you're going to be sending to and exactly how much. So you can always be sure that the transaction you're going to do is exactly what you intend. So once you get yourself a wallet, from that wallet, you'll be able to get your public address, and that'll be what's called your receiving address, for example. And you can take that receiving address to go and buy Bitcoin, where it will be sent to your receiving address. And there's a couple different ways to do that are most common. You can obviously just go to a friend and buy directly, which is called like an OTC, over-the-counter trade. Or you can go to a broker like Changelly or ChangeNow, and where you send them fiat currency, or you send them a different cryptocurrency, and they immediately transfer it over to the currency you like and send you back the difference. Usually the fees are going to be a little bit higher in that approach, but it is very simple and very easy to use. The other approach is an exchange, such as Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini. There are many other very trusted and well-respected exchanges. And on an exchange, it's a little bit more complicated because you'll have order books. You'll have buyers and sellers. And this is an important concept to understand within cryptocurrency, that there is no set price. There's no central bank or Federal Reserve controlling the price. It's purely based on supply and demand, buyers and sellers. So in an exchange, you're going to take full advantage of that, and you'll be able to say, I would like to buy at this price, and others would be able to say, I'd like to sell at this price, and where they meet in the middle, a trade happens. Usually the fees are going to be a lot lower on an exchange, but you're going to have to deal with a little bit more of a learning curve and complexity. So in summary, the global financial system is full of risk, and it always has been. Money has always been this ledger, whether it's rocks or with holes in them, or shells, or tally sticks, or the pieces of paper in your wallet. These are all representations of value that have third parties that you have to trust aren't going to deflate your purchasing power, aren't going to take away or inflate your purchasing power and take away from the value that you've worked so hard to obtain. It's also in that there's no single point of failure, and you don't have to trust another human being, but you can trust the math, which removes all the third-party counter risk. And the importance of controlling your own money. I'm sure you're going to be hearing about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, for example, and other different nation states and central banks that will be trying to use this technology while still controlling your store of value. So I want to emphasize, if you are going to get into cryptocurrency, make sure you get into the real thing, which means you control your own private key and you actually have full self-sovereignty of your store of value. Otherwise, it's not really a cryptocurrency, it's just a digital currency, and you're still relying on someone else. I do believe the future of money is digital, decentralized, and programmable. Once we have programmable money, we can do very interesting things. We can do microloans, we can do smart contracts, which enables you to put information on the blockchain based on different criteria that can then trigger payments or lending and borrowing and escrows and so many other very amazing things that would require trust. It would require a third party to be able to initiate. And then, as I've said for almost 8 years now, this technology, I do believe, will be more disruptive than the internet. It's a new internet, a new way for humans to communicate and interact with value. So as you can see here, the yearly lows is a really good way to think about the Bitcoin price. You know, it is a very volatile speculative investment. As of right now, it's around $18,000 for one Bitcoin. And it's earlier in the year, it was as low as 3,000. So it is a very speculative investment, but it is one that historically has been going up over time, even if you just look at the lows. My first purchase of Bitcoin was in January of 2013. And I know this says $65, but I'm pretty sure I spent about $50 and I got 2.5 Bitcoin. So it was about $20 a Bitcoin. So it's a very exciting opportunity to get involved in the future of money early on. And I would encourage you to do research, understand how this works, and get yourself a bit so you can be part of the future. And if you want help with getting started in an easier way to do that, I would also encourage you to check out the FIO protocol. I don't mean to kind of shield my own project, but it is a Cayman nonprofit organization that I'm very passionate about. And I do really think what we're doing is important, especially for those who are coming to cryptocurrency for the first time. So we do offer free FIO addresses right now. That's that human readable address that's just username at domain. And we also have additionally payment requests and FIO data, which is notes you can put about a payment request. So very similar to what people are used to today in centralized systems like PayPal or Venmo, the ability to send and receive with a request is built into the FIO protocol. And it's done in a very decentralized, self-sovereign, secure way. So you can continue to store and control your own value. So that is the bulk of my presentation. That is the end. And again, you can reach me on Twitter at Luke Stokes or Telegram at Luke Stokes or luke.stokes@gmail.com. I'm also on the Hive blockchain platform and blog and earn cryptocurrency. And so I would love to hear from you. And if you have any other questions that we could go into, David, I'd love that. Would you want me to share my screen continually, or would you like to stop the sharing?
Stop just sharing. I just have one question because we're running late a little bit. Just one question, when I was we're producing this show for indigenous people, which is like they make up 370 million to 600 million people worldwide. We want to bring them into the space because they want their own currency. But the first thing, I got a little bit pushback in saying that, we should not be promoting cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or Earth Dollar or anything, because there was a fear factor that we're going to be labeled as a scam or things like that. They're really afraid because the mainstream media has put the narrative, all the cryptocurrencies are in the same type of basket. So how do we do great mass adoption? That's our goal. How would we do that to overcome that type of perception?
It's a very good question. And I will say that the perception was much, much worse, 7-8 years ago when I was first getting involved. And it was the same with the internet. People were convinced that the internet was just full of scammers, people that were doing, terrible things, on the internet. And really that wasn't the case at a high enough level. And it's the same thing with cryptocurrency. The number of transactions that are done illegally with cryptocurrency is very, very low. And there are scams. It's important to focus on the core cryptocurrencies that have a lot of mass adoption already, meaning the top ones that have the largest market cap. And so it is important, again, to do your research and understand which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't. Generally, that would be today Bitcoin, Ethereum. Those are kind of the major contenders for that position. And then as far as like not getting scammed, a big part of that is controlling private keys and not being involved in anything that seems too good to be true. I would highly encourage indigenous peoples to look into this because it truly is a pathway to freedom and self-sovereignty. And it's a pathway that I think those in control today are a bit concerned about. And that's why they're spreading all these concerns and sharing all these stories, because they're actually accumulating this cryptocurrency themselves. If they can accumulate it enough, then they can continue to control in the new paradigm value itself. So I would encourage those who are interested to do their own research and don't listen to the narratives that are trying to basically drive you with fear as opposed to what's true.
So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. It was a really great explanation for average person to understand. This is one of the better presentations I've seen that is really clear and concise. you know, explain about Bitcoin and the usage and why it's important to us. Thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great one. Take care.
Take care. So today we have, thank you for Luke Stokes. And now we have another presentation coming up called Smart Mesh with Peter Yan. He is creating a cryptocurrency that's tied to the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG. So we'd like to see if he's online yet.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, nice to meet you, Peter.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. Would you like to introduce yourself? Then afterwards we can go. You want to make a video presentation first, or you want to talk first? What do you prefer?
Yeah, I can talk. Can I share my screen?
Okay. Tell us a little bit about who you are and your organization, and you can share, and you can talk about it. Okay.
Sure. Yes. So my name is Peter Yan, and I am an advisor for Smart Mesh. I'm also the CEO of Meshbox. Meshbox provides the hardware that's being used by Smart Mesh, and Smart Mesh develops blockchain and other applications that runs on Meshbox. So are you able to see my screen?
Yes, it's very, very clear.
Okay. All right, so can everyone see the presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the title of this is called Sunshine Smart Mesh Blueprint for Mass Adoption. And Sunshine stands for Smart Mesh and Meshbox. Oh, I misspelled Meshbox, but it's just Meshbox. Universal, Sustainable Hypermesh for Indigenous Peoples Ecosystem. So the Hypermesh is an infrastructure, which I'll talk about shortly. So we are now in a fork in the road. We have some choices to make, and we make our choices based on our actions. So we can either go the route of peace and prosperity, which is utopia with renewable resources, sustainable, universal. We can basically inclusiveness, equality, connectivity, consensus, or we can go down another path, which is death and destruction. So by the choices we make, we can destroy the Earth, climate change, through climate change issues. We can wage war, we can do all sorts of really bad things. But it's something that we could potentially choose, based on our actions. So how can we incentivize humanity to move in the right direction? I think we all know what the right direction is, but sometimes, we run on capitalism, or certain economies are based on capitalism. And so humanity requires incentives in order to move in the right direction. And can blockchain and associated technologies help? So my background is telecommunications. I worked in companies, large companies that deploy telecommunications such as 5G. More recently, before Meshbox, I was at Huawei for about 8 years, and I worked on system on chip for base stations. So I worked on 5G for many years. And 5G's technology is great, but still, in spite of 4G and 5G and all the very sophisticated networking technology, we still have 2 billion people without banking services, 1 billion without electricity, and 4 billion people cannot access the internet affordably. So why do such inequalities exist? It's not the technology that's the problem. The technology is there. It's a centralized business model. And how can we achieve better inclusivity? That we propose to move to a decentralized business model, which can help us to move us in the right direction in terms of peace and prosperity, and also being inclusive to try to help these people, all these billions of people who don't have access to the resources that many of us enjoy. So what we're proposing is moving away from a conventional model, conventional centralized model, to a decentralized model. In a centralized model, or the conventional centralized model, we have here households, and the households will get their, for instance, they get their electricity from a centralized provider, which is basically an electric grid provider. And that's, the energy is generated in a large power plant and then distributed through transmission lines, through distribution lines, and then finally to your house. Also, in terms of communications, we have a similar situation where people would buy their internet connection to an ISP, and then all these centralized applications such as Google or the Google Cloud, Amazon, all of these services are provided from a data center, which is also a centralized entity. And centralization is good because it provides for economy of scale. It enables very low cost deployment because everything is just centralized, and so it's possible to share very easily. But however, all of the wealth in a community is being paid to these large centralized entities, right? Facebook, Google, in terms of advertisement, your electric power, electric provider. And this is all fine, right? This could be fine, except that in many areas, these services are just not available. And so if internet is not available, then you have no choice but to accept that. There's no way that you can talk to your ISP or the communications cellular companies, and you can petition and say that you want a base station, but they're not necessarily going to listen because they have to do a return on investment analysis, and depending on whether or not you have enough people in your area and how much revenue you can bring to the company, then they may or may not deploy internet for your location. It could be a village, it could be a remote area, you just may not get it. On the other hand, in this model, which is a grassroots service provider cooperative model, so we have here a decentralized model in which people, indigenous people, or just anybody who is, who doesn't have access to these services, they can decide that they want these services, and they can deploy the services for themselves. They can deploy, for instance, a mesh box, which is a communication device. It's a very low cost communication device which meshes. It connects with other mesh boxes. And as long as one mesh box is connected to the internet, then they all can be connected to the internet. So maybe not every location, maybe not every household has an internet connection, but as long as one of these households has an internet connection, then all of these other households will share in the internet connection. And similarly with energy, if you have solar, you can decide whether or not you want to have electricity in your village, in your household, by just deploying solar. So that's another example of decentralization. And with this method, this is difficult to achieve because, you can put up your own solar and you can put up your own, Wi-Fi router, but how do you actually share this, and how can you monetize, right? And how can you share these services with your community, and how can you get paid for that? And the answer is blockchain. So blockchain is how we're going to make this all work. For those of you who don't have a background in blockchain, so blockchain is, this is just a quick introduction. In the blockchain scenario, you can request a transaction. So a transaction would be sending a token, for instance, or it could be executing a smart contract. So any type of transaction will be first sent to a group of nodes, and then there'll be a validation process or a consensus process. So this is to make sure that nobody does anything bad, right? That you're not doing something illegal. So all of these nodes, which is basically distributed all around the world, and these nodes belong to people. They don't necessarily belong to one large corporation like Google, for instance. These all belong to different people. And so these nodes will decide whether or not your transaction is okay. And if so, that your transaction will be placed into a block, and that block will be added to a blockchain. And this blockchain will be stored on every single node. So everyone has a copy. It's called a distributed ledger. So all of these nodes have a copy, and this blockchain, once it's established, basically once a block is added, then this blockchain cannot be destroyed, right? It cannot be erased because hundreds or thousands of nodes have the same copy. And you would have to destroy most of those thousands or tens of thousands of nodes in order to disrupt the blockchain. So it's very secure and it's transparent, right? It's transparent because everyone can see the transactions. And so you're not relying on any large company to trust a large company that they're going to do things right. Instead, everyone owns a piece of the data, and then everyone decides that the blockchain, basically everyone verifies the blockchain and ensures the security. Okay, so that's blockchain, and there's several issues that we have to address, and we'll talk more about how blockchain can, whether or not blockchain can help, and if so, how. So global connectivity. We can, for remote areas, global connectivity can be addressed by satellites, and satellites are being deployed now. There's several companies that are working on this. In the US, for instance, there's Starlink by SpaceX. There's also many in Southeast Asia. Many countries are working on this because this is a good way to connect people in remote areas. But however, with satellites, satellites just fly all around the world. And so they could be, the US satellites from Starlink could be flying over China, for instance, right? And so different countries, probably would not welcome each other's satellites flying over them and perhaps potentially spying on them, right? Countries will be paranoid for other countries to have satellites and for their people to use satellites from other countries. So there's this issue of global connectivity. How can we have consensus, right? How can we support consensus and not have people fight over the space above us? There's also climate change. Climate change is a major issue. There's been forest fires. There's sea levels are rising. Temperatures are increasing. The people who are the least equipped to handle the impacts of climate change are the ones who will probably experience the harshest conditions. And so, how can we address climate change? And blockchain plus Meshbox and certain technologies we believe can help to alleviate climate change. So this is something that we're working on as well. Okay, so Hypermesh. We talked about Hypermesh, and the Hypermesh architecture is a next generation infrastructure. Okay, so it's an infrastructure that's a decentralized infrastructure. Instead of you getting your internet from an ISP and you getting your electricity from a energy provider, we instead move to a decentralized architecture. So we use mesh networks to provide centralization for communications. And then also data storage, instead of storing on a Google Cloud or instead of doing data centers, relying on data centers for your applications, instead we move that down closer to the users, and we call that edge computing. So we're moving computation and also data storage much closer to the user themselves in the form of mesh boxes. Also, there's a distributed ledger, which I talked about, which is blockchain is an example of a distributed ledger, and that allows for banking and payments to be done, but peer-to-peer. Okay, so in other words, it's not using a bank, and maybe there's not a bank in your area, or maybe people don't trust banks, but instead of a bank, we would have a blockchain. And the blockchain is mathematically, cryptographically secured. There is no way that anything could go wrong. As long as you don't do something that you lose your password, right, or you lose your private key, then your wallet will remain safe. There's no one else that can have access to your wallet. Hypermesh also includes transactive energy, includes Internet of Things, also Internet of Energy. So transactive energy means that machines will pay machines, right, to to transfer energy, to pay for services, goods and services. Not only people paying each other, but machines can pay each other. It consists of space ground integration network, so the satellites I talked about, and then Sunshine is an ecosystem which is all working on this. So the layers of the hypermesh are the connectivity at the bottom. So we need to have a connectivity. This is the bottom of the pyramid. If you don't have connectivity, then you can have any great application that you want. But if you're not connected and you don't have access to, if you cannot connect to each other, then all of these other applications just cannot run. And so that's part of the reason why we think Meshbox is so important. Smart Mesh is developing the blockchain and tokenizing, right? This intermediate trust with blockchain, tokenization, exchange of goods, the value internet, and then different applications are supported by Smart Mesh. But then, you have to have something to run. If there's no internet access, then it's very difficult to run these applications, right? And so that's the reason that Meshbox is in the picture. Meshbox cooperates very tightly with Smart Mesh, and so we provide the hardware infrastructure for the hypermesh. So the hypermesh, again, is mesh boxes. We have indoor and outdoor versions. The outdoor version has solar and batteries incorporated, and then they also have a built-in card that talks to Internet of Things devices. And above, in the upper in the upper layers of the network, we have base stations and also satellite connectivity. So there's the internet backhaul, right? So mesh boxes connect to an internet backhaul, and then it connects to the internet, and then bridges the internet with the Internet of Things. So here's some interfaces. Meshbox has Ethernet interfaces. It has a mini PCI LoRa slot for LoRa, which is a long-range IoT connection, IoT protocol for Internet of Things. And it has a cellular SIM card, and then it has a computer inside and also a storage for data. So it's possible to store data on here. It's possible to store, for the blockchain, it runs a blockchain, which is called Spectrum. And you can also store data such as educational materials for school, for instance, for school in the remote areas. And then this is how we connect to a satellite. So there's various levels of networking that are used to connect to a satellite. So here's an example of a traditional wired network versus the hypermesh. So in the traditional network, every terminal, like say a cell phone or your laptop, it will connect to a Wi-Fi router, and then that will connect to some kind of a modem, such as a fiber modem or whatever, some kind of a modem to access the internet, right? And then you go through edge network, a core network, the internet, network of networks, and then finally to your centralized cloud, right, which is a data center. And the data center is where you can have payments. You can have like Google Pay or Apple Pay or WeChat Pay. That all the credit cards are run from centralized or run from data centers. There's data storage like Google Cloud or Dropbox. You can store your data. And then there's social media, right? Facebook and so on. That all runs in the cloud. Now for this to work, everything has to be here. You have to have this whole network. Everything has to exist. Otherwise you cannot run your applications. And it takes a lot of, it's very costly, and it takes a lot of time for your communications to connect to the data center and then back down to you. So even though I'm right next to somebody, for instance, on WhatsApp, I still have to go through all the way to the WhatsApp server in the cloud, and then come all the way back to my friend, which is right beside me, in order to operate. On the other hand, with the mesh network and mesh boxes, it's possible to have for instance, a social media that is just, if a friend is right next to me, the data or the communications between us can be just immediate. It just basically hops through one mesh box and then to my friend. So it doesn't have to go all the way through this huge network. All of this entire network infrastructure is compressed and it's basically implemented on mesh boxes that are connected to Wi-Fi. And so it's very easy to deploy. And the applications that run on mesh boxes are similar to the ones that run in the cloud, but they're made to be run in a mesh network. And so tokenized payment transactions through blockchain, you can have secure decentralized data storage, and also social media applications can all run in a local area network, which is a mesh network, which is implemented by mesh boxes. And then mesh boxes will connect. It can connect to, like, say, a fiber modem, right? If you want to connect to a fiber modem to the rest of the network, you can, or you can connect directly to a satellite, which is good for remote areas. Here's a similar picture with the 5G, right? With 5G base stations and small cells, as the access network, but it's the same similar situation. And 5G networks are very expensive to deploy. I mean, they're very sophisticated, but they're very expensive. And so for people who don't even have any internet, then 5G is not really necessary. If you don't even have 2G, then right, you don't need all the bells and whistles of 5G. Instead, you mainly need web browsing and streaming videos, and that can all be supported by Meshbox. So we've deployed in the US, we've deployed in Chicago and various public schools, also in the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, and we're doing trials, proof of concepts in other countries, Southeast Asia. We're talking to, we're planning for Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, different places like that, also in Latin America. So if you're interested in having a Meshbox POC, let us know. We can talk to you. These nodes here have, these are outdoor nodes that have a solar panel and a battery built in. So they're completely wireless. They don't have to connect to any wires, and you can just deploy them very easily. You just connect them up, and then they mesh together with other mesh boxes, and they form a local area network for your community. And as long as one mesh box is connected to the internet, then all of the mesh boxes that connect together in a mesh will be connected to the internet as well. So here's another example of electric power. Let me check the time. Okay, so I'm almost done. So electric power system is also another another area that we're working on. So in a traditional electric power system, you have a top-down distribution of electricity. But however, this assumes that all the power lines are in place, and which is expensive to deploy, and it may not be available in remote areas. On the other hand, with the hypermesh, what we do is we would have solar panels, and then there are devices or basically nodes which will allow to to send electricity between different microgrids. We call these microgrids. So these are small, maybe a village or a household that has solar, that has a battery, and then it's possible to share this electricity with other households and other other villages. So maybe one village is out, maybe it's a cloudy day in that village, and so the sun's not shining, and so maybe the battery is depleted. So one village may not have electricity, but other villages may have electricity, and so they can share with this household that has which doesn't have electricity, and the accounting for all of this can be done by the blockchain. So blockchain provides all the billing and the billing infrastructure and the payment network infrastructure to be able to support this trading of energy. And the trading of energy is called transactive energy. So that's one application of blockchain and mesh boxes. So the value of Smart Mesh and Meshbox to indigenous peoples is that we propose to collaborate closely and to deploy the HyperMesh infrastructure, which is designed for a very low cost and easily deployable infrastructure. So the HyperMesh initially covers communications, but it also supports IoT and fintech, and transactive energy. And mesh boxes will connect to the internet backhaul, including fiber, modems, 4G, 5G, satellites. So any internet backhaul can be supported. Also, IoT devices for smart cities, smart homes can be connected to Meshbox directly. In the economy, so basically this allows for indigenous peoples to start their own micro entrepreneurship. They can have self-determination, that you can decide when to deploy your services such as internet, energy, data storage, when to deploy such services in your community, and to pay each other instead of paying a centralized corporation for it. You can keep the wealth in your community. And so this helps the economy of a community. And so we're looking for funding from NGOs and the UN for proof of concepts. We're excited to be able to do this now. We have mesh boxes that are manufactured or that will soon be manufactured. They've gone through FCC approval. And so we'll be able to deploy soon. And then we welcome any interested parties to contact us and to help us with the deployment. Here's some contact information. Here's my email, peter@meshbox.io. Henry is the CEO of SmartMesh, so here's his email address. And you can also connect with me on WhatsApp.
And thank you so much, Peter, for coming on. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you, David.
There's a question I'm asking is that does your SmartMesh require 5G to operate? Or I saw that the fiber optics and 4G operates, but do you really need the 5G? Because a lot of indigenous communities don't want the 5G in the community.
You're right, yeah, you don't need 5G. So for instance, if we can connect to a satellite, Starlink will be available. They're going to launch 42 satellites total, and then there's other companies. So we just need a small satellite dish. We can connect to satellite. You can also connect to any kind of a modem, like a wired infrastructure. So a modem, like cable modem or fiber modem, that's just a wire connection to the internet. And as long as one mesh box is connected, then all of them will be connected. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. That's very clear. And just a last question, because there's somebody else coming on, is that we want a mass adoption of blockchain and cryptocurrency. That's a great blueprint. Of course, this is one of the solutions. How can this we create the mass adoption of blockchain and cryptocurrency? Perhaps using your technology or other solutions that you're in the future.
Right, yeah, so the mass adoption comes because there are people who don't have internet. Close to 4 billion people don't have internet. And so Meshbox will provide the internet for those people. Plus it comes built in with the blockchain. So the Meshbox runs the Spectrum blockchain, which is very similar to Ethereum. So Spectrum, our blockchain, runs all of the same smart contracts, and it also supports all of the tokens that Ethereum supports. But then we do it for a much lower fee than Ethereum. So it's compatible with Ethereum, but with much lower fees, which is okay. It's more accessible by indigenous people or people who don't have a very high income. So the blockchain can be deployed wherever Meshboxes is deployed, and Meshbox can be deployed wherever there's no internet. Even if you have internet, you can still use Meshbox because it will be a cheaper solution for the last mile compared to other technologies.
Thank you for coming on. Where can we find more information about the work you're doing and how to connect with you?
Sure, yeah. So you can send me email, peter@meshbox.io. There's also henry@smartmesh.io. You can send us email. We have websites, which is basically, the website is smartmesh.io. And so that's for SmartMesh, and also meshbox.io. Those are two websites you can go to as well.
Thank you.